This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and a very big hello to all of you wherever you are in the world. I'm soon to be joined by Ben Alexander, but before I do that, I'd just like to recognise all of the people who keep making comments and just getting involved in the program. We do call it the third voice here at Rugby Unity because, as you do now, our mission is to help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. And the only way that will happen is if rugby fans around the world have their say and get involved. So just a few comments I'd like to call out. Jose Reyes was our 500th follower on Instagram, and he asked for a shout out to the Potomac Eales Rugby Football Club from Washington, D.C., who were invited along to an England training session to observe and to learn. So great initiative there by the England rugby team. And I do hope that the Potomac Eales Rugby Football Club in Washington, D.C. are doing well. And we certainly hope that you're going to have some success in your season. So a big thanks to you, Jose, for reaching out. From James Watson, excellent analysis and discussion. Thank you very much, James Watson. Gary Emery says, "Hi, David. Thanks for uploading this podcast. Both your and Ben's analysis and comments were balanced and fair. Go Wallabies and have a great week." Gary, I am having a very good week and I hope you are too. So from Cameron Verrills, first time watching but loved hearing Australian perspectives and being unbiased about the game. Mum would be very proud of you. I think I remember what that's about. Yes, we the supporters of both teams are the ones who pay the bills. No question about that. So thank you, Cameron, for having your say. And finally, Subwax says, "Love the unbiased content. Thanks, guys. Not all Aussies are whingers." And I think he might have a bit of a point there. I think some of the Australian media have really overplayed some of their grievances, and even watching some of the programming this week that was continuing. So let's move on, people. All right, Ben Alexander, a big hello to you. Couldn't get you into the studio this week because of illness in the Alexander household, but Lions tour, we won't go on for it for too long, but it was only last weekend. So let's give our wrap up. When you think back about the Lions tour, what do you think and what do you feel?
I think two things. One, like if you measure it, I mean, unbelievable success, I think financially and ticket numbers, I think records on all fronts. So that's great. The game needed it. And then so that was good. But emotionally, until that second test, I was quite flat. I've got to be honest. But that second test really just was one of the best events I've ever been to. Absolutely loved it and really did make the tour. And then the boys were able to back it up with another really just determined performance on Saturday. So
things would have improved. Things would have improved for you a little bit earlier if indeed you were a genuine rugby fan and you'd watched the First Nations Pacifica match.
Yeah,
because that's
I watched all of it. Watched past the 14-0 bit, but yeah.
But
I know also been a bit of frustration. Imagine if Will Skelton and Bobby V had sort of played in that first test. You know, that just Will, I mean, you don't want to, it's not all down to one player, but geez, the guy just does he lift everyone around him, and it just would have been a totally different series had he played in the first test, I reckon. So a little bit of frustration that we weren't able to see the best of the Wallabies but from the get-go, but I do think they played some really good footy as the series wore on.
Yeah, but I don't think they can avoid responsibility for that performance in the first test, which, you know, let's call it for what it was. It was flat. It was passive, and for whatever reason, they just didn't arrive. And like, I don't buy into this. We scored this many tries and we won the second half, or all that sort of stuff. It doesn't count. That was a very, very poor performance in Brisbane. And that's exactly what I thought at the end of the third test match. I wonder if we had played like we did in the second the second and third test, if we'd played like that in the first test, what would have happened? Because as Ewen McKenzie said the other day on the Rugby Unity podcast, he did say that he felt that the Lions were there for the taking. And if we had been perhaps better prepared for it, maybe that would have just happened. And just to clarify something, I was pulled up in the comments section. I was critical of Homebush last week, and the person pointed out that the atmosphere at the game last week, particularly before the game, was exceptional. And yes, the Rugby Unity reporters who were on the ground did say that as well. But the comments I was directing were really to, the actual precinct out there and getting to Homebush. The experience at Homebush and then leaving Homebush is not great, and particularly when you compare it to Melbourne, which is world class. And indeed, I saw Simon Shaw, the British and Irish Lions former player, who'd obviously been in Australia and had a great time here. He made the comment about, the difficulty of accessing, quality food and drink after games, that, Australia seems to lock up shop, close up shop pretty quickly, and there's not really a lot of life for people to engage with. And he was suggesting that something needs to be done before the Rugby World Cup, because there'll be so many visitors here from overseas, and perhaps we don't live just as Europeans do. So I do think that there's something in that. And I know the New South Wales government has the Office of the Nighttime Economy, and we need to do more to have more amenities and facilities open so people can continue to enjoy themselves into the wee hours. You're a hotelier, Benny. How difficult is it to start thinking about providing service, as after games?
Well, one, we're a long way from the Canberra Stadium, so it's never much of an issue. We always do a bus to and from a game, and that's actually good fun, like the banter on the bus. Everyone's jammed in together, especially when the bus is full. Sometimes there are people singing on the bus, especially we had some English fans one match just singing. And so I guess, totally hear what Simon said. Totally agree with what Simon's saying, is that people want a night out and the game is just a part of it. Like you said the other week, Pemby, that the fans being able to chat to players after the games, there's so much that adds to the night. And, if the government's definitely got to play its part to make sure people can, continue having a good time celebrating a win, commiserating a loss easily after a game. And, hopefully we don't have to bus everyone out of Homebush after the World Cup final to get them to a decent pub. Yeah. Hopefully something can be done around the stadium.
Yeah, indeed. And just during the tour, there was commentary about, rugby in Australia's too weak. Perhaps the Lions, won't return, or there was some speculation that, it may be into the future. Clearly, it's a 12-year gap between tours. But I would have thought that the chances of the Lions not returning to Australia are pretty low when you consider how much money they've just carried out of Australia. And when you look at South Africa, they've got the stadiums, but they don't have the resources. I think the comparison of average annual salary in US dollars is something like, in Australia it's 64 to 68,000. In South Africa it's something around 17 to 19,000 US dollars. So the resources are simply not there. The stadiums are. And when you look at New Zealand, their average salary in US dollars is higher. It's much closer to Australia, but they simply don't have the facilities over there. They don't have enough big stadiums to generate the revenue. So money is a key driver for the Lions. So I think on that alone will mean that they will be returning. But what did you make of that when that sort of speculation was floating about?
All those warm-up matches, apart from the First Nations Pacifica one, were, kind of non-events that we weren't competitive. And so the excitement, and I've spoken to a couple of Lions fans who felt the same, they got it. You need to have that nervousness as a fan going into the game. Are we going to win? Are we going to lose? And most of the games on this tour sadly didn't have that. Now, I don't think that's not the Lions' fault. I think that's more of a statement of where Australian rugby's at. But like you said, Pemby, you'd like to think, geez, they did well financially and they'll want to come back. it's how can they rejig the schedule to have more competitive games. So certainly, if you just take the first half of the first test out, 2.5 of those tests were good footy. Pacific Nations, First Nations match, that was a good game. But, yeah, I think maybe they got to play Fiji. Maybe they could go to some of the Pacific Islands. I mean, that's not going to fill a whole calendar. But, I mean, I can't imagine, if rugby – it all just depends where rugby's at in 10 years' time, mate. Can Australian rugby sort of pick itself back up and be a bit more competitive and maybe be a third or a fourth in the world in 12 years' time?
Of course it can.
Or are we 12th or 13th in the world? And, it's hard to look that far ahead other than to agree that the money would be too good for them not to return.
We're on the way back.
I hope so, mate. I hope so.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the Lions touring France. I think that would be extremely competitive on the field. And I also think it could give the Lions a bit of a new lease of life, because when you look at the age profile of the Lions fans who came to Australia, they're many of them about my age, baby boomers.
They'll be able to travel across the English Channel. It won't be a big travel load on the fans.
It'll enable younger people to be able to access the Lions, because I'm not sure how many young people would have been able to have afforded to be able to come to Australia. And whereas to jump across the English Channel, many more younger British and Irish Lions fans would be able to be exposed to the matches. And I think, the Lions series that I've seen over many years now here in Australia, and I've seen 4 now. This was the oldest profile of the Lions fans, and I think it's just getting a little bit harder for younger people to get involved. And the Lions is such an important institution in world rugby. This touring institution, it is one of our most fundamental and sacred organisations for what it represents and what it does. And we need to make sure that those younger people are getting opportunities to see them play live. And that touring element of it for the fans when they're coming to this side of the world would have been prohibitively expensive. And I think if we're going to get younger people engaged, those British and Irish younger fans, I think France could be a really good option for them. So I do hope that they think about that as an option. So, yeah, for me,
just not at the expense of coming here. I agree, it'd be amazing, like a French Lions tour. Imagine their warm-up matches of playing like the French Barbarians, Bordeaux, Toulouse, all those top French clubs into a 3-test series against France. It'd be amazing, and I'd imagine the money. The Lions could do very well out of that as well. Just not at the expense of coming to Australia. So maybe they'll skip going to New Zealand. You don't want to play the Kiwis. Go play the French and then come here in 2037. That'll work nicely.
Yeah. So anyway, a big thanks to the British and Irish Lions fans for the Sea of Red, for coming all this way to making the occasions what it were. Certainly, we're delighted to host many of you at the Dock Hotel here in Canberra. As Ben said, the Melbourne event, I'll never forget it. It was just right up there. I've been to many, many, many test matches all over the world over a long period of time, and it certainly ranks right up at the top. So a big thanks to the British and Irish Lions fans, to the organisation, to the players, to the sponsors. On behalf of Australian Rugby, I thank you for the 100 million or 100 million plus that the tour has put into the coffers, which were pretty lean. So, a big moment for Australian rugby that to be able to host the Lions as they did. So very grateful and a very big thanks. But Ben Alexander, life moves on. The Wallabies get ready and they head to South Africa very soon. To play the Springboks in 2 matches. First one at altitude at Ellis Park, then at sea level in Cape Town. What are your thoughts about the Australian team getting ready and the transition from a Lions to the Rugby Championship from a player's perspective? How do you manage that sort of interim period as you get ready for that very big contest in Johannesburg?
Yeah, it's tough to get up emotionally. I remember last time we had a few weeks, we went back to Super Rugby for a bit, and then we had a week or two off, and then we're into the Bledisloe. So, no rest for the wicked, eh? Heading over to play the back-to-back world champs at altitude. Coming off a Lions series. At least the boys have had good prep. That Lions series, was really great preparation for taking on the world champs in their backyard. I actually caught up with one of the Australian under-20s coaches today for coffee, and he was saying that Australian under-20s got absolutely dusted by the Springbok under-20s, and he said there was a lock and a flanker, I can't pronounce their names, that apparently will be featuring for South Africa. So word is the Springboks might be giving a few of their under-20s a run, and to start with an eye on trying to be the first nation to win 3 World Cups in a row, which would be, would be an incredible feat for the country. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the boys bounce back and to see what sort of side the Springboks put out, because I think you said the other week, Pemby, they'd probably have 2 eyes on their test against the All Blacks at Eden Park and a few weeks later. So they might be using our matches as warm-up, but in saying that, we've got to, try and build on the momentum that we've generated in the last 2 tests.
So with that, did you get the opportunity to play at altitude? And if you did, what was it like playing at altitude, and what was it like preparing to play at altitude?
Yeah, all the kickers loved it because they'd kick it an extra 10, 15 metres, so it's like they'd be hitting their pitching wedge, but it'd fly like they'd pick their driver. So great for the kickers. Always really dry, fast games up at the high veld. Games are always very quick, but in saying that, oh my goodness, it kills the lungs. Absolutely kills the lungs. That first 10, 15 minutes when the game's at its quickest and you're just like, oh, sucking in seagulls. There's a moment or two there where you're just not sure how you're going to go, and then you find your second wind and you settle into a game like normal. But it is unique. Definitely a unique experience playing at altitude, and it is it's always physical playing the South Africans, but playing them at altitude with that adjustment that you need to make with the lungs, with less oxygen, on top of the physicality is a reason why Aussies have only won once there, and we've only won once there in I don't know however many decades.
Yeah, it's interesting. Eddie Jones said the other day exactly that the ball moves faster at altitude. The passing, the kicking, and hence the game moves faster.
Yeah, it's always very dry. I don't know if it's just I'm no climatologist or weather scientist, so I don't know how often it rains, but I do remember they're really, really fast games when the ball is in play, like as you just said, as Eddie said, the ball moves very quickly. It's really good for kicking. It's always dry, so there's not no grease on the ball, so there's not a lot of knock-ons. But then obviously, then there's breaks in play. You got to get your breath quickly. The South Africans, I think this Springbok side is much fitter than ones in the past. South Africa was the biggest team, and especially when I played them, we'd always try and run them off their feet and back our fitness. But I think this South African side is certainly fitter than Springbok side's gone past. So, it's going to be a huge challenge. And, why? I think definitely at the coast, like Durban, Cape Town, is much more, again, I'm not claiming to be a weather meteorologist, but it is always much more humid down the coast. So Durban, I do remember a lot of times that the ball's really slippery, lots of drop balls, lots of scrums. The game doesn't flow as much, but altitude, total opposite. So, yeah. So
with the South African team, the Springbok team, Rassie Erasmus is clearly a, rugby savant. He was a very good player back in his day, but he's obviously now a master coach. And, he is always looking for innovation. As you say, I think he has put the focus on the fitness. He's now really brought some athleticism to combine with the traditional, strong, heavy South African forwards-based approach to the game. As a player, did you ever think much about the opposition coach going into games or going into series? Was that ever something that was floating around in your mind, or were you only ever worried about the players that you were playing against?
I think the only time I remember talking about it or thinking about it was when we played the Lions in 2013 with Gatlin. So there was a bit of talk about what style would they play, and that was obviously come down to the coach. But no, other than that, no, there wasn't much talk about the coach. I think Rassie just does a great job. Obviously, I think he's a meticulous planner. Like he really had the Springboks firing at the right time at that last World Cup cycle. So I think he's a meticulous planner. He looks at the big picture, and he's been blooding a lot of players the last few years. He's really changed and modernised the way the Springboks play. They're still very good scrum, maul, physical team, but they've also added so much skill, a lot of fitness.
Pace.
And some pace and some really innovative plays as well. Seen some really, really innovative plays. So they're a complete side now, and there's a reason why they're number one in the world and back-to-back world champs, combined with humongous support from the home crowd. There's nothing like it in world rugby than a full house in South Africa, hearing the fans sing their national anthem, and it's special.
Yeah, they've certainly set the standard in these test matches, the warm-up test matches we've seen so far, the couple of games that they played against Italy. Watching them, you could almost, the atmosphere was sort of coming through the television. There was so much enthusiasm, and they were the small kids, the older people, just everybody is there. The whole cross section of South African society getting in there behind the team, and I suppose that's what happens when you're 2 times world champions and you are developing teams the way that they are. So it's really exciting, isn't it, to think that that's what is next on the menu for rugby. Also, the All Blacks head to Argentina for 2 matches against the Argentinians. The first one in Cordoba, the second one the following week in Buenos Aires. The All Blacks probably not at full strength, a number of injuries there. And they've picked some young emerging players. What are your thoughts about that particular 2-match series?
I mean, if you think back to COVID, I think the Argies are probably one of the teams that, I don't know the exact record, but they've beat the All Blacks quite a few times since COVID, at least twice, maybe 3 times. So they'd be really confident. They've got good history against the All Blacks. I don't know whether it's a style that they play that disrupts them or whether the All Blacks just underestimate them. I'm not sure why, but the Argies have good history against them. So I could definitely see the Argies winning, could definitely win one of those tests. I still think New Zealand, I think like South Africa, New Zealand will be really focused on those tests against South Africa. Because, let's be honest, it's the best game in rugby is, New Zealand get v South Africa, really sort of the 2 heavyweights, is usually the one game of the year that the whole world watches. So can't help but think both those sides will be, taking their first 2 matches of the Rugby Championship seriously, but both have sort of one eye to their second matchups.
I watched the Argentinian matches. They lost twice to England in that recent series. A very good young England side went out there, but there was enough in the way that the Argentinians played in that series that would give me some confidence that they are not just going to be a challenge for the All Blacks. I think they'll be a challenge for certainly for Australia and for South Africa as well. And they did beat the British, and they beat the British and Irish Lions in Dublin. So I just think it's fantastic to see the continued development of Argentinian rugby and their leadership of rugby in South America. And, what an occasion for the All Blacks to travel there and for the fans in Argentina in both Cordoba and Buenos Aires to enjoy world-class rugby as well. So we'll be following those very closely here on Rugby Unity. So all of you All Blacks and Argentinian fans, dial in and to hear what Ben Alexander, Ewen McKenzie and Eddie Jones has to say about those important test matches. But at the same time, a little under 3 weeks away, Benny, we get ready for the Women's Rugby World Cup. The Australian team has been named this week. They had a better win over Wales after the shock loss, I think, to Wales up in Brisbane. They're carrying a few injuries to key players into the tournament, but I think there's a moment coming for rugby, and indeed Finn Morton and his fellow scribes at Rugby Pass have just published the top 50 women's players. So get on to Rugby Pass and have a look at that. They haven't published all 50 at the moment, but there's about 20 of them up there at the moment. And it's great just reading through some of the profiles of the players. And it brings real excitement. And to think that the Lionesses have just won the European Championships in football. You've got 8 cities where England have really invested in this. England, the Red Roses now for a number of years, and they're clearly the favourites. So I think the women's this is a World Cup that will change the women's game. I think it will change the perception of the women's game, and it will carry the women's game forward. And all of us will start to be paying a whole lot more attention to what I believe we'll see some, fantastic football played. Certainly at the Dock Hotel, you'll be putting up the games, I imagine.
Yep, the time zone's not ideal, but we'll have some on. And I just hope the women's game can build on momentum that the women's sevens has really built the last few Olympic cycles. I know a lot of non-rugby people who I'm friends with were really tuned into the women's sevens at Paris at the Olympics. So let's hope that interest transfers over to the 15s and the girls can go well.
But and there's no reason why it shouldn't, because if you look at the quality of people like, Portia Woodman, Wycliffe, Georgia Miller, both from the Black Ferns, they're outstanding rugby players. Desi Miller, the Australian live wire winger, she's great to watch. Marley Packer, the England captain, she's a tough player. There's a lot to like about women's rugby. And Emily Chancellor, who was on Rugby Unity a few weeks ago, made a great point that it's women playing rugby. It's not women playing men's rugby. So they play the game in a particular way that it's not like the men, because they're not built like the men. They don't run like the men, but they play the game, but they play the game with a different emphasis and a different focus. So no less enjoyable to watch. So, I just think there's so much for us all to look forward to when the teams get there. The excitement's building. It's great when you're seeing the teams named and you're seeing the joy in the athletes' faces to think that they've been picked to represent their country. And I just think the English will be so up for this, and they'll be so ready, particularly after the disappointment of the last Women's World Cup in New Zealand, where they went in as the red-hot favourites, but the Black Ferns were able to pip them in that famous final at Eden Park in New Zealand. So the best of luck to everybody. And here at Rugby Unity, we're just making our final plans as to how indeed we are going to be following the Women's World Cup and keeping all of our viewers and listeners up to date with those matches as we work through to the final. And it's great to see, I think, also the way World Rugby's gone about pricing the tickets. I think most of the games are going to be sold out because they're in venues that are of a reasonable size. They've made sure that the ticket prices are accessible and they've prioritised getting people there. And I think the other thing we're going to see is just enormous amounts of social media content, which we're all going to be able to enjoy and like and share and subscribe and get involved in. So I think that social media piece is going to be really interesting in terms of taking the women's game up to that next level. Because again, going back to Rugby Unity's mission, which is to help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world, there's no question that the women's game and the future health of the women's game is a important contributor to that mission. So we'll be doing what we can to draw as much attention to this wonderful tournament. And the best of luck to all of the teams that will be competing, and the best of luck to everyone there in England Rugby as the hosts. And I'm sure they will put on
not too much luck, not too much luck to the English, mate. I mean, they can't wish luck in England and the English in the same sentence, mate.
Having spent my time with Eddie Jones, advising Eddie Jones when he was coach of England, I've got a bit of a soft spot for the white jersey now. And the way that the England team presented the other day at their team announcement, they look formidable. They look fit and they look ready to do some damage. So anyway, it's going to be great. So looking forward to that. So Ben Alexander, any final thoughts before we wrap up the sort of layback Wednesday rugby unity? We've got a program on Friday with Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie. And if you do have any questions out there, rugby unity listeners, pop them in the comments, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, because the program's going to be called You Ask, We Answer. So we're going to get Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie and myself answering your questions because, as we say, the third voice is so very important to us if we indeed are to achieve our mission of helping secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. So what's for you this week, Benny, apart from nursing that family of yours back to health?
Yeah, get them sorted. For me, this weekend's not footy, it's City to Surf, so looking forward to that. But one quick shout out, Dave Porecki, who announced his retirement pretty suddenly. Huge shock to me. Tremendous player. Thought he still had a lot of footy left in the tank and could have gone to the next World Cup. So don't know Dave, but just want to wish him all the best, along with Nick White, who announced his retirement. And then one question I'd like to hear your thoughts, Pemby, is I don't know if you saw the article about John Eales investing in rugby and creating this Rugby Future Fund. I'm keen to understand more about how that works, how that's going to help rugby in Australia, and apparently it's increasing in value, like it's been a good investment. So I was keen to know more about that, mate. As a rugby fan, how does that, got tremendous respect for Eales. He's done very well outside the game.
Well, that fund, it was set up by a guy called Jeff Wilson, who is a fund manager and an absolute rugby tragic. And he gathered a few of his mates who are also fund managers and said, well, listen, why don't we put our, resources together, start this fund, put the money in, donate our fees, so all of the management fees are not paid. So the management fees then get invested in rugby. So the corpus goes in, people get their return because it gets invested in all sorts of different places. So you actually get a proper return. But the fees that these people would normally be charged on certain amount on the monies invested, then get invested into rugby. So yeah, it's a great innovation, and I was pleased to see Big Johnny Eales out there promoting it. And there's the only way that rugby in Australia will go forward is if collectively the community works together to make it happen. And it's great to see Ealesy doing his bit, but also to Jeff Wilson and the other fund managers there making their contribution. So big thanks to them. So, all right, Benny, well, thank you very much for coming on once again. Very enjoyable. Look forward to speaking to you next week. And yeah, just a reminder, everyone, you ask, we answer. So if you do have any questions, please let us know. And the other thing is also we're close on 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. And so we are giving our 1,000th subscriber a Rugby Unity beanie and a special shout out on the Rugby Unity podcast. So we'd love to get to that 1,000 mark, and we'd like to do it before the weekend is over. So if you're not subscribed, please do. If you are subscribed and you know people who aren't, please tell them. And we'll continue to create content that is helping to secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. So listen, big thanks to Ben Alexander and a big thanks to you, audience, for coming back once again. But for the moment, please be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.